More than simply Western Europe's bloodiest interwar conflict or a mere prelude to World War II, the Spanish Civil War fundamentally forced Spain to confront centuries-old tensions and divisions, a crucial detail often lost in oversimplified narratives. Following a leading monarchist assassination, the reductionist view pits a coalition of nationalist generals and traditionalists on one side against a perceived radical and lawless left-wing Republican government on the other. Yet the nationalist partially successful coup did not merely split Spain. Long-standing tensions powerfully resurfaced, fueling both the conflict and the ferocious retaliations that followed. One of the most striking expressions of this was the Republican anti-clerical movement. It was not merely about rejecting the church, but an effort to eliminate anyone and anything that represented an institution long seen as the backbone of Spain's traditional order. In many Republican towns, killing the local priest became a revolutionary duty, driven by fears that leniency could jeopardize the entire community. This radicalism resulted in the murder of 6,783 clergy, nearly 10% of all priests in the Republican zone. This targeted violence only galvanized the nationalist cause, however, uniting it under the cross. Emilio Mola, one of the coup's architects, initially envisioned an authoritarian secular republic. But as murdered and tortured priests were left in the streets, military authorities increasingly encouraged Catholic sentiment. Catholic leaders, once neutral, aligned with the nationalists, and by mid-September, in the nationalist stronghold of Pamplona, Bishop Marcelino Alachea publicly declared the conflict a crusade. The nationalists quickly adopted this powerful and unifying rhetoric, framing their struggle as a second Reconquista, a holy war not to reclaim Spain from Muslims, but from Reds, liberals, and separatists, cast as modern-day heathens. The murder of clergy was also used to justify limpieza, a swift and brutal effort to cleanse nationalist-controlled areas from hostile majorities. As one of Franco's press attachés bluntly put it, they had to kill, and to kill all Reds, to exterminate a third of the masculine population and cleanse the proletariat. In one harrowing example, Córdoba saw around 10,000 people, roughly a tenth of its population, murdered during the war. Clearly, the Spanish Civil War, with its many bloody phases of ideological violence, did not arise from overnight tensions. It was the culmination of centuries of antagonism. At its core lay three historical areas of conflict, rooted as far back as the Reconquista: class tensions, authoritarian rule versus libertarian instincts, and centralized government versus regionalism. The Civil War marked the most powerful clash of these forces, a tragic reckoning with Spain's tumultuous history. The genesis of this grand and devastating clash lies in the Reconquista, a centuries-long struggle between Christian and Muslim forces for the Iberian Peninsula. In 722, a small band of Asturian fighters and Visigothic remnants led by Peleo won a symbolically powerful victory at the Battle of Covadonga, marking the start of a long campaign of reconquest. Over the next few centuries, periods of peaceful coexistence and warfare saw the Christian kingdoms grow stronger, as the once powerful Umayyad central authority fragmented into smaller kingdoms. Briefly reunited and resurgent under the Almoravids and later the Almohads, Muslim power in the region faced a turning point in 1212 at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa. There, a united Christian coalition dealt a crushing blow to the Almohad Caliphate, shattering the last major Muslim empire on the peninsula. By 1492, Granada, the final Muslim stronghold, fell to Isabella and Ferdinand, completing the Reconquista. This prolonged struggle was more than mere land reclamation. It was a division of power and seizure of resources to be dictated on the aristocratic elite's terms. As Muslim territory shrank, a feudal army embodying state power allowed the monarchy and the warrior aristocracy to retake possession of the land. Yet agricultural land was ill-suited to finance the aristocracy's unabating military expenses to continue the Reconquista. They didn't need sustenance, they needed wealth. Seizing common land for sheep grazing, the elite capitalized on the lucrative income from merino wool, imposing devastation on ordinary peasants. Food supplies were fatally disrupted, and soil erosion left what was once the granary of the Roman Empire as a barren shadow of its former self. Without land to till and faced with hunger, many peasants ingloriously turned to the army, and later to the empire, for basic survival. This contributed to a population decline, from 14 million in the Middle Ages to just over 7 million by the end of the 18th century. As Castile's power grew through military expansion, the elite's needs left the common people facing not triumph but disaster. This marked the beginning of what would become a deeply divided Spain, a land unified under an authoritarian fist and Christian rule, but fractured in its social and economic foundations. At the same time, the political structure saw the Catholic Church gaining increasing power. Initially grounded in feudal military control, Castilian authoritarianism gradually evolved into a system of political control, dominated by religious authorities. As the Reconquista progressed, the Church acted as a propagandist for military campaigns, often through playing a direct role through military orders such as the Order of Santiago and the Order of Calatrava. But with the Reconquista nearing its end and the shifting needs of the elites, the clergy's role began to evolve. Under Isabella's reign, a pivotal transformation occurred. The warrior archbishop gave way to the cardinal statesman. Regardless, the Church's connection to the military remained steadfast. As Spain's empire expanded at an unprecedented rate, the crucifix marched behind the sword's shadow. What the army conquered, the Church integrated, molding it into the Castilian state and building a Spanish empire where faith and force worked in tandem. While the Church and the military built an overseas empire, the threat of eternal damnation, reinforced by the very real presence of the Inquisition, shackled the population. A mere accusation, true or false, could result in one being seized by the Holy Office. Meanwhile, confessions extracted before the autos de fe, elaborate ceremonies where heretics were condemned in public, eerily echoed the methods of a totalitarian state. The Church also controlled all forms of education, burning books to enforce an intellectual embargo aimed at stamping out religious and political dissent. Core Castilian virtues such as resilience in suffering and calmness in the face of death were also instilled, promoting the belief that to be a starving knight beats being a gluttonous merchant. At the forefront of the Spanish Catholic Puritanism was Cardinal Francisco Jiménez de Cisneros, an incorruptible ascetic friar who became one of the most powerful statesmen of his era under Isabella. Amid discontent with a corrupt papacy, Cisneros led Spain in combating heresy and revitalizing Catholicism, effectively guiding an internal reformation. After becoming Archbishop of Toledo in 1495, Cisneros reformed the clergy with decrees, banning concubinage and enforcing parish residency, Sunday prayers, and regular confession. Monastic orders obediently followed, sometimes even criticizing economic privilege in ways that echoed the Church's original teachings, though forgiveness and brotherly love remained notable omissions. Despite these contradictions, the Church continued to sanctify the Castilian social structure, serving as the most authoritarian force in its consolidation. The early 16th century saw Spain confronted with a new rift, centralism against regionalism. This conflict erupted dramatically in 1520 with the Comuneros Revolt, one of the first major uprisings against the Spanish crown. When Charles V, the Habsburg grandson of Queen Isabella I, became king, he was seen as a foreigner surrounded by arrogant Flemish courtiers. Speaking little Castilian, he filled vital administrative positions with his trusted Burgundian court, sparking discontent. Most controversially, Charles defied Isabella's will, which prohibited granting religious offices to foreigners by appointing the young William de Croix as Archbishop of Toledo. As a naturalized outsider, William was seen as a pawn in a significant position of power once held by Spain's Catholic champion Cisneros, fueling bitter resentment. Cronyism aside, Charles also imposed a heavy demand on Castile for funds to secure his election as Holy Roman Emperor. Revenues from his domains in Naples and the Low Countries were insufficient and far lower than what the Castilian municipalities could offer. Met with fierce resistance, he tried to brute force increased revenue by bribing and bypassing the Cortes, the local assemblies that historically approved taxes. Eventually, he successfully changed the Castilian tax code to the detriment of the tax-exempt Hidalgo class and the church, but not without trampling the local rights and customs. In response to these excesses, the cities of Toledo and Salamanca rose in rebellion, later joined by others to form an alliance of city magistrates known as the Comuneros. Representing the independent people, they sought the eradication of the foreign Burgundian-oriented politics and judicial reform. Although the armed uprising was crushed in 1521 and central authority was re-established, Charles, under pressure from lenders, agreed to concessions with the wealthy Castilian cities upon which he was dependent. The result was a meritocratic system based on management standards formulated by the Cortes and the rise of an empire of cities. This tradition of local governance would continue to clash with central authority, enduring until the 18th century when the Bourbons quelled it. Despite centralization seizing the day, powerful regionalist forces, such as those in Catalonia, would soon knock again on the Habsburg door. By the end of the 16th century, the Castilian state was defined by three deeply intertwined attributes: feudalism, authoritarianism, and centralism. While once a fountain of power, these traits increasingly morphed into heavy chains stifling progress. The empire, built rapidly through the established central authority by Castile, began its decline almost as quickly, marked by the catastrophic loss of the Spanish Armada and the prolonged economic toll of the 80 Years' War and the Italian Wars. Amid sweeping changes across Europe, the Castilian ruling elite chose to remain blind, stubbornly clinging to lost pride. As treasures from the Americas continued to flow into the church's coffers, hungry mouths toiled endlessly on the fields. The influx of gold and silver, precious yet useless, triggered sharp price fluctuations, eroding Spain's economic foundations by the early 17th century. Regionalist aspirations continued to fester and clash with the unyielding central authority, while the rigid class structure produced an ever-widening gulf between the ruling elite and the common people. The three lines of conflict, class interests, authoritarian rule against libertarian instinct, and centralism against regionalism, became ever more pronounced, stoking tensions that would eventually ignite violent upheaval. The next episode will explore how these deepening divisions unfolded in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, with Catalan ambitions for independence and the rise of libertarian currents challenging the Castilian ruling order.